Welcome to Taoism with Ian Felton. I'm Ian Felton, psychotherapist and Taoist practitioner in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I want to ground the history of Taoism in a text called the Neiye, which is inner work. The Neiye came from indigenous Chinese culture of more than 2,400 years ago. And these were practices that were uncovered by the people to get in contact with Tao, but requires a certain type of intentional practice to let it in. And that's what the Neiye is. It is the language that the people of that time had available to them to describe. So Daodejing is not a philosophical text. It is a text of a somatic practice that was developed long before the Daodejing was written down. And it largely describes a lot of the states that a person can achieve by practicing the inner work, the inner training. And it's written, the Chinese character is written as a heart. But it's not just desire or passion, it's the entire inner experience of someone, the whole phenomenological structure and experience of someone who is practicing Tao. I'm not going to even try to put words to it because I will fail incredibly at it, but it's sunset. It's Monday just after Ramadan. Everyone is out and living life to its fullest in a way that we don't see in America. Community, people with no pretension, no hidden agendas, at least not on the surface. But it's just a wonderful place to be doing this episode. And so when we're exploring Daodejing, if we're not aware of the somatic practice that underlies it, it's going to be very difficult to make sense of a lot of the chapters. Now, some of the chapters on Daodejing really are just discussions about how to be a good leader, how to run a government, how to treat people, that sort of thing. But those still arise out of the somatic practice that started well before Daodejing was written. So I'm saying this because even as we explore Daodejing and I do translations of the chapters and go through this material, we have to understand that at the core is the practice. The practice is essential. And then the experience. What is experienced through the practice? And the Neiye describes it, the inner working text describes it, but we're so far removed. Even modern China is more than 2,000 years removed from these practices. Everyone who's trying to understand it, regardless of if you're native Chinese or someone like myself, we're doing archaeology in a way where we can only approximate. But through these practices and the experience, then there's a body's knowing of Tao. And then distantly, we have the texts in the classic Chinese, the Chinese written at that time, 2,400 years ago. And even modern Chinese is very distant from that Chinese from so long ago. And then we have the translations that I'm doing. Even if there was a Chinese scholar doing a translation into English, they're going to be coming up against the same challenges. And then there's the commentary. And so as I talk through this, we have to first understand how far removed we are from the source. But at the same time, paradoxically, which is how Tao operates, we're not disconnected because Tao is inside of the body. It was discovered through the body, which we all still have. And so by attempting these practices, we can try to uncover Tao, try to rediscover it. And so what I'm going to do, I put a PDF on ianfelton.com/podcast, and it has the Neiye, the inner work, and it has a lot of the practices that come directly from a translation of the classic Chinese. And you can do those practices yourself. And I would recommend before listening to the podcast that you do at least one of those practices. Even if it's for a minute or two, that's better than nothing. But if you can do it longer, that's even better. So let's move on and let's look at Chapter 6. And Chapter 6 is a very, very short chapter. It doesn't have much length at all, but it really starts getting, oh wait, let's listen. It's time for prayer. You got to see this. Okay, so Chapter 6, here's my translation of it. The valley spirit won't die. It's called the deeply dark female. The deeply dark female's opening is called the root of existence. Thread-like, as if always there, use it without strain. You can translate that in a couple of different ways. I did won't die, which gives it a quality, a somewhat defiant quality. Nevertheless, I made that choice. Now, when we get to the section on the deeply dark female, so Xuan, we've seen that word, that character, a lot in other chapters. It's one character, but it's super complex to translate because it is a color, first of all. It's a color, it's a dark color, but it has a quality of an abyss. So it's not just a color, it's just something physical. And then peen is the best word that we have in English is female, but even that alone isn't super accurate. It's because it's not about gender. It stands for so much more. It's in yin yang, that there's masculine and feminine qualities, and so female is too simplistic because it's really about receptivity and generation and all these other cosmological things that this classic Chinese text, there's qualities associated with hard and soft, masculine and feminine. So The point being, we don't want to carry all of our Western baggage when we say the deeply dark female. It's as close as we can get. Now, thread-like, as I've always known. So there's duplicative characters, which mian. It has this gossamer thread-like quality, like something soft and wispy that just continues on and on and on. So thread-like, sometimes we have to choose one word because the Chinese is so efficient. There's 4 characters that carry the weight of sometimes 20 or 30 English words. And if we don't want to have the translation weighed down, sometimes we just have to make a choice. And oftentimes that choice is really poor compared to the meaning that's conveyed in the Chinese. So we say the deeply dark female, and there's a lot of room to project meaning, and this is why this is why I wanted to study Chinese language, because I wanted to get closer to Daodejing, knowing that the only way to do that was to study the language. So then the next part, opening. So the actual character in that, when I say the deeply dark female's opening, the character there is men. So a lot of people translate it as the mysterious female's door or the mysterious female's gateway. Yes, that is a literal translation, but I used opening because I think there is some physical weight of this line, and I think it's leaning into that is not a bad choice. There is an organic bodily weight to that line, and I chose just to do it. The deeply dark female's opening. And then lastly, there's in the last phrase where I say use it without strain. Qin is the character, and it's typically translated as diligence, hard work, exertion, strain, but laboring at something. And so I'm choosing just to say, another way of saying it is don't force it. Just use it without forcing it, without strain. So there's lots of ways to critique my translation. You have to, because it's so far away from the original source that putting it in English, and the burden of putting it into English, which they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, these Chinese characters brought with them tone and a visual quality. So they were sound and symbol. One character. So if a picture is worth 1,000 words, and these Chinese characters, where one line might be 4 Chinese characters, think about the work, the expansion that would be required to try to do justice to those ancient Chinese characters in modern English. And you would end up with, instead of beautiful poetry, you would end up with a lot of prose, and generally we don't want to do that. So what we do with translations, do what I'm doing in this podcast, where we do a translation and then we do notes, and the notes try to explain the decisions that we made, and then someone can read the translation, read the notes, and have a more complete picture. That's the best that we can do when we're just doing exposition like I'm doing in this podcast. The practice is still there, and that's where I encourage everyone to do the practice, because these are practices that modern psychotherapy are, they're stealing the practices. These were done thousands of years ago, and now modern psychotherapy is finally catching up and realizing, oh, some of the best ways to try to help people is to get them to engage in these mindful somatic practices, get to people's emotions through the body, and so on. I'm not going to go on too much of a tangent with that. Let's just switch over and take a look at some of these other translations. So I haven't done a Lin Yutang translation yet, and I'm going to switch over to his. So here's his translation. The spirit of the valley never dies. It's called the mystic female. The door of the mystic female is the root of heaven and earth. Continuously, it seems to remain. Draw upon it, and it serves you with ease. So you'll hear some differences. He says mystic female instead of deeply dark female, like what I did. He also says draw upon it and serves you with ease, where I say use it without strain. So it's a little more wordy. The only problem that I have, I'm trying to steer away from mystic because Xuan, it is a color word. So mystic really changes the meaning quite a bit, and I'm trying not to do that. Is there mysticism in early Taoism? We'll get into that. If you really want to understand the root of Taoism in a substantive way, the best source right now is called The Original Tao, and it's by Harold Roth. And that is what, if you want to get into the deep evidence-based research, that's where you want to go. So mystic for Xuan, that's a little dicey for me. Let's move on to the Hall Ames translation. They say the life force of the valley never dies. They're very process-based. They don't want to get into transcendence at all. Let me just read it first. The life force of the valley never dies. This is called dark female. The gateway of the dark female. This is called the root of the world. Wispy and delicate, it only seems to be there, yet its productivity is bottomless. So this is where I'm pretty aligned still with Hall Ames. They try very much not to get into Tao as anything transcendent, where I'm a little more, I would say, transcendent. There's some ambiguity. For example, if you're a baby in the womb and you're living in this embryonic fluid and experiencing life in there, that is what's imminent. That's what's available to you physically. But nevertheless, there is a mother surrounding you, and when you're existing in that womb as a 9-month-old baby before being born, that mother is real, even though you would experience her as essentially a transcendent being, not imminent at all, but she's still there. It doesn't mean that she's not there. So that's where I want to have a little bit more leeway, because to some extent, I imagine this entire universe as being in the womb of some beautiful mother, and we're in that embryonic fluid, and we don't have access to this beautiful creature that we're inside. I think that's a wonderful way of looking at this universe, not as just some cold process of existence. So I'm not going to go to that strict of a processual interpretation of Daodejing. We want to leave room for our own ignorance, which we're completely full of. One more. Victor Mair, I've also not read from his, so I'm going to do that one this time. The Bali spirit never dies. It is called the mysterious female. The gate of the mysterious female is called the root of heaven and earth. Gossamer it is, seemingly insubstantial, yet never consumed through use. So he leans into mysterious, which, again, I'm on team Hall Ames with this, with dark female, but I say deeply dark, like an abyss, which is another way of saying mysterious. But Xuen really is more of a physical color with physical substance. So that's the choice that I made. So one other thing with Mair's work is that he's a serious translator, and so I use thread-like, he uses gossamer, and those are pretty close. It's a beautiful translation. In some ways I wanted to use gossamer, but then I felt like Mair kind of already did that, and maybe it would just be too overtly lifting from his translation. So I really like what he did in that one. So those are some other translations to look at, and have done some serious work at trying to uncover this chapter 6. I want to close with maybe just some reflections on being in Senegal when this episode of the podcast. The mother, the deeply dark mother. Africa has always been looked at as being this mysterious place to Westerners, but we have to seriously keep in mind that it is the motherland for all of us. Every person came out of Africa, and if you haven't taken any serious time to understand it and understand where we came from, this is it. This is where we came. And when I go to Dakar tomorrow, I will be going to the island of Bure, and they have what's called the Door of No Return. And there you will walk through the door that so many, probably millions of slaves walked through before being put on a ship and shipped away to some place in the world where colonial powers use those people to build what has become modern Western world. And if you want to understand where you've come from, it's really important that you think about those things and don't see Africa as some third world place, but rather the womb, since we're talking about the mother, the womb of all humanity. And think about the crimes that have been perpetrated against the mother, against the motherland, all of our motherland. It's the motherland to all of us. And think about all of the wealth. If you're experiencing life with a lot of wealth in a highly developed country, more than likely, that society was built from exploiting the people in the land of Africa. But if you're listening to this and you're thinking about the mysterious female, the mysterious motherland, in a real tangible way in our lives, we have to look at the continent of Africa and think about, this is where we came from. And there's so much Tao present still. The tightly knit communities, the lack of pretense, the humility, the being close to the earth and nature, not being in the head, not living in a world that's all brains and no heart. I felt like it was important to at least mention, as I record this episode, in the beautiful country of Senegal. So, until next time, let me read the original Chinese as a tribute to the indigenous Chinese people that wrote this chapter. 故身不死，实为玄牝。玄牝之门，是为天地根，绵绵若存，用之不勤。